Now, I can hear you through the screen, right? You're going, enough, Jordan. Enough of the display options. I don't care about visuals. I care about time. To that I say, that's a weird sentence. I don't know why you care about time so much, but sure, I'll indulge. Let's talk about the timeline. That was an amazing segue. We'll go ahead and delete everything in our scene. We've got a clean scene here. At the bottom, you may have noticed by now, there is, of course, a timeline, right? This is exactly what you'd expect. Right at the left here, we have our go to end, go to beginning. We have play forward, play backwards. We have a stop button. But you'll notice if you do hit play, which you can just hit the up arrow to do as well, it's going so fast, right? That's because this button right here is not active. This is an important button. This is the real-time toggle. If you press this, now we are getting playback in real time along our timeline. That is important because if I create a box, I keyframe this, I keyframe the center, and then, let's say over the duration of the entire thing, I want it to move that far. I keyframe that too. If this is off and I want to play back my animation and get a sense of what it looks like, this is not at all a realistic depiction, right? This is way too fast. This is what it actually looks like. So important that you have this active if you need it. I don't really understand use cases where you don't have it on, to be honest with you. So I would just leave this on for the duration of everything that we do here. Now, a little bit more information here. We can see numbers here, right? 2 number 1s there, and then 2 number 240s here. By default, your scene will be 240 frames. That is 10 seconds, right? Because the default frame rate is 24 frames per second inside of Houdini. The very left button here is essentially the, if you hover over it, it'll tell you it's the global animation start frame. This is essentially the start frame of your scene. The very end one here is the end frame of your scene. And these ones are merely the in and out clamps of what we are seeing in our timeline. If I shrink this, for example, you'll notice the timeline is changing. Now, note that my scene duration is not changing. My scene is still very much 240 frames. But what I have access to in the timeline is a shrunk down version of that, just for the sake of temporal resolution, so to speak, which is, my fancy way of just saying zooming in on the timeline. All right? I shouldn't have said temporal resolution. I'm sorry. I got carried away a little bit. Point is, now we've got a shrunk down version of our timeline that we can also, click right in the middle of this thing and just drag around to reframe. Now we have frame 1 through frame 71, or we go, frame 170 to frame 240. The in and outs here will show you in real time what our in and outs of the timeline are. But if we want to trim the actual duration, let's say, let's go back to 1 and 240 so we can see the full expanse of our timeline. If we actually want to trim the duration, let's say we don't want a 10-second thing, we want a 5-second thing. Well, we can actually just enter in our new duration right here, 120 frames, and that will clip everything, including the out point of our timeline, since we no longer extend past 120 frames, right? Now I've got this new look. Another way of doing this, I'll move this out of the way real quick. Another way of doing this is to click right here, the global animation options. You can hit Alt-Shift-G to open this up, or you can just navigate over and press on this button right here. This is the global animation options, which gives you information about your overall timeline and project, right? We can see the frames per second is 24. We can see the start and end of our scene, along with some other helpful stuff. One of the things being this playback, integer frame values, which if you don't know what an integer is versus a float and whatnot, we will get into that a little bit later, but this is helpful because, as it currently stands, we can navigate 1 frame at a time, but sometimes you may have sub-step information inside of your scene that you want to look at. And so by checking this, instead of going 1 whole number at a time, we can give a fraction of a number. So we're doing 0.1 now. So look, I'm at frame 13. Now I'm 13.1, 0.2, etc. And you can totally customize this however you want. I'm going to check that back on so we have integer frame values again. And I'm going to close this. So just be aware this is here if you need it. Okay, so by now you have probably seen me do my fair share of keyframing, right? I do it real quick, do a little animation, and I want to talk a little bit about that, how to actually keyframe your own animations. Keyframes are basically used to essentially timestamp locations in space or specific parameters for things. You can think of it as a key frame. It's a frame of great import, right? It's key to what we're trying to do here. So if we create, we'll hop up to the OBJ level here. I'll just clear my scene and I'll create a cube. And in this little experiment, I want to animate this cube purely along, let's actually animate it along all three axes, these translation axes. So I have it selected. How do I actually go about creating a keyframe? Well, let's go back to frame 1 in our scene. And if I hover over any one of these boxes and I hold Alt and left mouse button click, it will create a green box here. But this green box always means that this is a keyframe, an animated keyframe, right? I can keyframe this, I can keyframe this, and you'll see on the timeline a little green box has now appeared, letting us know that there is a keyframe of some kind in our scene on this frame. It doesn't dictate exactly what it is. It could be anything. It could be multiple parameters that are keyframed. Like in our case, we have 3, but there's only one icon here. It just lets us know on that frame there is some animation, which helps us when we're navigating around the scene and looking for the important frames that we want to tweak after we've already done our animation. Point is, we've got it here. If we want to undo that animation, we hold Control and left click. That deletes it entirely. If I hold Alt and I click on the name of a 3-value parameter like this, it will keyframe all 3 values. Same is true if I Control click. So let's animate the translation here. Let's hit Alt and click to create our keyframe. We will then scroll all the way to frame 120, and we will then move this in space on the X-axis, on the Z-axis, and on the Y-axis. Now you'll notice these parameters are now green again, and it has created a keyframe. It did it automatically. And now in between these frames, it will interpolate between our keyframes, right? I'm not sure if it's on by default or not, or if it's just my setup, but this key right here to the very right of the timeline, this icon here to the right of the timeline, is where we can set up if we want auto keyframing or not. If we undo this, I'll Control click to get rid of that. And before I move it in 3D space, I'm going to click this little drop down. And I'm going to turn off auto key changes. Now you'll see that icon changes. Auto is now gone. So if I move it on the X, on the Z, and on the Y, now we've got like this dirty mustard color that is letting us know, hey, you've made changes to these parameters, right? But it's not confirmed yet. Like you have not locked in this keyframe. So if you want to do it, you better do it, or else if you move away from this frame before locking it in, it resets it and it undoes it. It says, obviously that was a mistake, right? So we'll do that again. Boom, boom, boom. And we will keyframe, keyframe, keyframe. And now we have that interpolation between those two positions. So if you want to have auto keyframes on or not, that's your choice. There is an actual keyframe button here that you can click and it'll keyframe certain parameters in the node. But to be totally honest with you, I don't even know how it decides which ones to keyframe there. Like I didn't have anything highlighted, it just picked translate, rotation, and scale, but completely ignored our boys pivot translate and pivot rotate. You know, that's not cool, man. That's not cool. So, I don't typically use this button. I like to just use the Alt and Control click approaches to creating keyframes. Now that we've got the keyframe, we can play it back in real time. And looking at it, we are noticing it is easing into the animation and then easing out of the animation, right? It's not a linear animation. It's not consistent. If we want it consistent, well, we can go ahead and change the actual animation curves ourselves. We can click on this animation editor button. We've been living in the scene view this whole time. We've been comfortable, right? We've made our little home here. Well, it's time to get uncomfortable, Frodo. It's time to venture outside of the Shire into a new tab. We are going to leave our beloved scene view, and we are going to click on the animation editor, right? This is a whole new world for us. Navigating in here is fairly straightforward. You right-click and drag in order to pan. You middle mouse button and drag to scale. You can either drag to the right to expand or up and down to shrink and grow. It's very intuitive. And then you can also use a scroll wheel to zoom out and, left mouse button click to highlight certain keyframes. Now, these are our keyframes. These are the X, Y, and Z translate values manifest as curves. But what does that actually mean? Well, if we click down here in our channel list, we can see our geometry name box one. These are the values of the box right now. These are not keyframed, so there's nothing about these that would be indicative of that. But the bottom, the translate ones, look, they're green here as well to let us know that they exist and they are animating. If we click on any of these values, we will realize it in the animation editor, right? If we click, hold shift, and then click on translate Z to highlight all of them, we can then see them all at the exact same time, right? Up here, we see the timeline. We see, frame 0 going up to frame 120, so that makes a lot of sense. And we can see the easing that we're talking about. Now, just for sake of visibility and simplicity, I'm only going to select the Translate X for now. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to move around, and we will see, yep, sure enough, it is easing into the animation, and it's easing out. If we click and drag on any of these keyframes, we will see the handles of that, right? If we click and drag, we can actually change the value of that keyframe. And by clicking and dragging on the handles, we can change the easing amount and the easing duration and really alter the way that our animation works. For sake of simplicity, I'm going to do something that we'll look at in a second, and I'm going to split this top and bottom so that we can still see our scene view. Don't worry about that. I'll cover that in a moment here. But here we can see our animation and our curve in the same thing, which will help us make a little more sense of this. Now, I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm having an issue. I'm so tired of trying to drag this around and scale it to fit in the frickin' window. Well, if I click in the animation editor, I can just click F to frame my selection to the window. This is true of all of them as well. If I highlight all of them and I press F, it's going to frame it all to the scale of the animation editor that exists in my viewport here, which is very helpful. So we can see it eases in, and then it eases out. Well, let's say I don't want to deal with that. Well, I can click and drag on this keyframe. Again, we'll switch back to just X here. I can click and drag on this keyframe, and I can shrink this down by clicking and dragging this so that it doesn't exist. And I can click and drag on this to shrink it so it doesn't exist. And now I have a linear interpolation of the X, right? No more easing, at least on that axis. I'll Control Z to undo that. If you click and drag and hold Control, well, now it actually locks it, because, if you're just clicking and dragging, you can move it up and down on accident. Let's say you don't want to do that. You just want to shift the duration of the handle. If you hold Control and click and drag, you can just do that and drag it all the way in. Do the same here. Control drag all the way in, and now you have a truly linear interpolation. You can actually just highlight the keyframe here, click on the handle itself, and you'll get numbers down here. You can actually see acceleration 1.6. So let's say I want it to be an even slower ease in. Well, I'll up that to 3 instead. I want it to be a 3-second ease in. I mean, you can see that right here. The easing starts at frame 0 and it ends at frame 72. At 24 frames per second, that is 3 seconds. So we can shrink that down to 1 second or get rid of it entirely at 0. Again, lots of ways to do the same thing in Houdini. Resetting this one more time. Another way that we can do this. I'll scale this up for now. But another way that we can do this, if we highlight both of our keyframes, let's say we just want to linearize it without clicking and dragging anything at all. Well, there are buttons up here as well that have control over how our handles operate. This, for example, the straight button will just pop them into being straight right away. If we want to get that back, we can click this one, Bezier handles, to get our Bezier handles back that we can now click and drag. Or we can click this one right here, Set Selected Slopes to Automatic, which will create automatic ease in and ease out, right? Lots of ways to play with this, lots of flexibility. You'll notice that they gray out the minute that I click away from any of the keyframes. The minute I highlight it back, they're back again. Now there's also display settings. As now you might expect, right? Everything has display settings in Houdini. It's fantastic. Let's zoom in super tight here. Let's say we're in a section, we're really working on this handle, and then I want to frame up the entirety of Translate X. I can choose vertical adapt and horizontal adapt to reframe top to bottom and then reframe left to right as well. Or I could, again, zoom in here, get all lost, and then by highlighting our translate, clicking in the scene and pressing Control A to select all the keyframes that are a part of this slope, we can now hit F or press this button right here to frame that selection perfectly within the bounds of our animation editor. All of these things can be played with and tested. It's changing what handles you have access to, what numbers are visible to you, and can be altered however much or little you want. I typically don't touch any of this. I don't do a ton of animating in here, and when I do, it's really just a matter of changing the easing amounts for the animations or just making them full linear animations. But there's a ton of flexibility that exists in here where you can create a new keyframe and then, completely alter the way that your animation plays. Now, we were talking about framing a selection. There is one thing I want to cover real quick, and that's that you can do the same thing with geometry. If I create another sphere in the scene, and I move that way out yonder, and I'm working on this, and I want to frame the sphere, but let's say I'm lost. I'm like, where'd it go? You get lost sometimes. It's okay. It's okay to admit. Let's shrink that down. I just click that little button to collapse it. Let's say we're lost, and we want to get to that sphere. How do we do that? Well, we can frame, if we highlight this, we can hit spacebar and F to frame this selected, or select this, spacebar F to frame this selected, or spacebar and H to frame all the geometry in our scene. So we get like the full macro perspective of our scene. Spacebar F and spacebar H for that. Anyway, that was just a little subplot there. We're doing side quests now. Figured that was useful information for you to jot down in your notes. But the take home from this really is more about the animation editor. I want to touch one more time on this as far as additional ways to access this tab, or at least a less obtrusive version of it. Let's say you want to keep your viewport as it is. You can simply hover over the parameters that you want to edit the curves of and hold Shift and click to get a pop-up version of this animation editor in your scene. Now I can actually edit my animation in a less obtrusive way. I can add another keyframe there, and then I'll add another keyframe there, and I'll drag this over, and I'll change this, and I'll drag that around, and I will make what may be deemed the most hideous animation of all time. And the cool thing is I just did it live because I'm that good. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now, clearing my scene here, I do want to show you one more thing. If I create a sphere at the center of our world, I'm going to frame up to that, and I, keyframe the translation there, and let's say I just move it on the X, for example. I've got this, right? Let's say I play this back, and man, I wish it was stretched out a little more. Well, now I have to go back here, delete, and then go here and set a new one. Wouldn't it be great if I could just drag this keyframe in the timeline over a little bit? Well, you probably guessed that you can. It'd be crazy if you couldn't do that. But the way you do it, you don't click and drag, you're going to lose your mind. That's just how you navigate through the timeline. What you want to do is middle mouse button click and drag. That's how you kind of claim a keyframe and move it around. But you'll notice it's kind of a funky navigational system because you get these handles over here that you can left click and drag and actually expand. And the way that this works is you can middle mouse button click to create your window and then expand the window to encapsulate more than one keyframe. Now, if you middle mouse click and drag, you can move the collection of keyframes over in any way that you want. Really proud of you guys. We're ripping through a lot of stuff here. This is fantastic. I hope you're enjoying it so far. There's so much to explore, and I really can't wait to contextualize all of this for you guys in the actual projects we do. But what I want to look at now is very important, and we're going to use it a ton. So I wanted to at least touch it in this section. Right now I have a scene, right? I have a sphere that is being copied to a bunch of animated points on a grid that are moving up and down, and we have a whole army of spheres here that are undulating and bouncing free. If I pop out here to the OBJ level and I want to see what this animation looks like, well, I've got my real-time toggle checked, so that's good. And I'm going to push play, and what we're getting is, well, it just hit 24 frames. It took like 4 seconds to reach 1 second. The reality is there's too much geometry or too much information to compute in real time to get any sort of real-time playback. So what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to know if this looks good? I don't want to render a final image and waste all that time only to have it look like garbage. Well, that is where the flipbook comes in. The flipbook is this button right down here. Now, don't press it yet. Pressing it will activate it. Let's actually pause our scene and right-click on this for me. this will give you a flip up with new settings little toggle button that we can press, which will open up our render flipbook pop-up. Now, these are essentially the settings for what will eventually be a preview render, so to speak, of our scene. It's essentially a cached version of our viewport that we can play back in real time in order to make sure that our animations look good. Now, right out the gate, you may see there's a few tabs of settings, but let's stay in the output tab for now. The main and most important one is this frame range. This is just asking what range of frames do you want to render essentially into this flipbook preview. Now, we've got a $RF start and $RF end. This is short form code. It's called HScript. We are going to talk about HScript later on. So for now, let's get rid of this and just replace it with 1 and replace this with 120 because I know I want the frame range to be 1 to 120 like my timeline is. Now underneath this, a very big gotcha. This one got me so hard in the beginning. If scoped channel keyframes only is toggled on, you will have a bad time because if there are no keyframes in your scene, it will do nothing. I can prove this by pressing start and it says flipbook generation complete, but I got a whole lot of nada, right? It's only looking to generate flipbooks for animation frames and whatnot. Now, I don't have traditional keyframes in here, so it's not going to do anything for me. That's no good. I always turn that off. That just causes way more problems than you'd want. I mean, it literally tells you here the memory usage. If you toggle that on, it reduces it to 0 images. It's going to make no images for you. If I have keyframes here, let's say I create a keyframe there, and then I create a keyframe there. I'm just moving the whole lot of them for whatever reason. Now I turn on scope channel keyframes only, and look, it's up to 2 images. That means it's only going to create a preview for the 2 images that have keyframes. So we don't want that. Turn that off. And actually, let's delete these awful keyframes. With those keyframes deleted, let's just go ahead and press start and see what we get. When we press start, maybe we'll get this pop up. I'll go ahead and allow access there. And what we are getting is, again, a playback of the entire frame range that we selected in its own little mplay window. So when it's done, we have a real-time playback of what we would have seen in the viewport had it been capable of doing it in real time. Another helpful little thing in here is this top right button right here. This is the disconnect. So, for example, if I shrink this down and I move this over here, and let's say I change something. Let's say I make it way lower. That's it. That's the only change. And then I want to do another preview. If I push this button now, if I left mouse button click on this, we'll see it is overwriting what we just did, right? Every single frame. Now, if we go back, it's the lower version. But if we go further on to the ones that haven't done it yet, it's the higher version. This may be what you want to do. You may want to overwrite it immediately, and that's fine. But maybe you don't. Maybe you want to A/B test, right? I do it a lot, right, with different simulations, and just to see the difference between the two. If you click this top right button, this disconnect, this window is now completely separated from what Houdini is doing. It's its own entity now. It's no longer connected to the active Houdini session. So what I can do is I can highlight this, I can bring this way up, and then I can run another one. And what it'll do is it will create a new pop-up now. Now I have 2, and I can directly compare them by playing them both side by side to see which one I like better. So that's really cool. Super duper helpful, right? One of the aspects, though, is this kind of looks a little bit like butt cheeks, to be totally honest with you. The quality on these viewport renders by default aren't that great because they don't have to be, right? It's not important that it's super high quality. It's mainly, its main purpose is just to give you some semblance of an idea of what your scene is looking like when it's played back in real time. If I pause this and I go down though, and let's say, we can see up at the top here, 1280 by 720. We can see the resolution of this play blast, so to speak. If we right click here and go to flipbook with settings, well, now we can navigate over to the size tab and we can actually change the resolution of our next flipbook render. We can also go into the effects tab, and in the anti-alias section, we can choose high quality. We can even add motion blur if we want to. with specific shutter. The motion blur always ends up looking really grainy because it's all temporary anyway. But let's say we raise the anti-alias quality and the resolution. We can now start that one instead. And the quality of this one is much, much better right out the gate. And we can see we've got that 1920 by 1080 resolution. And just one more time, a reminder, if you're having any issues with the flipbook, check that scoped channel keyframes only is toggled off. That'll save you a massive, throbbing headache. I guarantee it.
If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more, head to doublejump.academy.com/Jordan for the full course. Links in the description. You're just a click away. Click it.